This video on Coptic bookbinding demonstrates one method for sewing the book together. Coptic books are sewn together using unsupported link stitch. There are different variants of this kind of stitching. This video is going to cover one that I call chain stitch because it resembles the chain stitch used in embroidery. So chain stitch will be used on the two center stations, and the two outside stations will have a twisted stitch. You will need your prepared pages and covers with the holes punched as shown in the first video. You will also need a single curved needle and waxed linen bookbinding thread. For this book, I'm going to use black because I think it goes well with the cover and will be very visible in the video. To estimate the amount of thread that you will need, you can use the book itself. You're going to need the height of the book times the number of gatherings plus 2 for the covers and plus 1 more because the way that the back cover is attached requires an extra length. For starters, you're going to thread your needle. With the waxed thread, I find it's helpful to pinch it between my fingers for a moment to warm it up before trying to thread the needle. I use a 4-ply waxed linen thread, but you can use other threads. I find it's helpful to use a waxed thread because it helps prevent the thread from getting tangled around itself while you're sewing. We're going to make a slip knot. We're going to take the end of our thread, fold it over in a sort of backwards P. We're going to reach the front 2 fingers through the loop, grab hold of the short tail, keep hold of the other end of the tail with your other front fingers, and pull the loop tight. The benefits of the slip knot is if you pull this short one, the loop will shrink. And you'll see why we want that in a minute. I find it's helpful to pre-assemble the book and place it off to the side. So you're going to start with the first gathering. It's always good to double check that the holes line up on both gathering and cover. For the first gathering, you're going to start in the bottom hole from the inside, and you're going to sew to the outside. You're going to pull your thread through. You're then going to go into the corresponding hole on the cover and loop around. I prefer to go from the inside to the outside on this cover because it's easier to make sure that I don't accidentally pierce the paper somewhere I don't want to. And then I'm going to go back into the hole in the gathering. I'm going to make sure that I don't pierce the knot. It can be helpful before you do this to just tug the knot out of the way. You want to try not to pierce through the thread at any point in the sewing process. And you're going to gently pull your needle back through. This will form a loop around the spine and attach the cover to the first gathering. You are then going to pull the knot tight down to the edge of the gathering, tighten up your thread, and loop through the loop in the slip knot. You're then going to tug on the loose end of the slip knot to tighten it, forming a knot. You're going to go through the next hole in the center of your gathering, to the outside. I'm going to put a sheet of paper down in the hopes that it makes it easier to see the thread. And you're going to do the same thing as you did on the first hole. You're going to go through the corresponding hole in the cover. And pull it tight. And you're going to make sure that your pages, the edge of your pages, line up with the holes in your cover. And you're going to go back through the hole in your gathering. Again, try to be careful not to pierce the thread. It just makes it more difficult to tighten later to the appropriate tension. And you're going to continue stitching into the next hole. Now, because your thread is rather long, it will snag on things. Just gently unsnag it and continue moving. We've gone through the hole in the cover, around the spine, and back into the hole in the gathering. And at each step, I'm checking to make sure that the long stitches are flush in to this fold, and tightening as needed by gently tugging on the stitches and then tugging on my loose thread. So this is the last of the 4 holes, and we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to go out from the center to the outside just as before, and we're going to go through the corresponding hole on the cover, but this time we are not going to go back into the same hole on the same gathering. What we're going to do is going to loop the thread under the stitch that we made, to form a loop, and then we're going to go through the loop, and this is the first of our twisted stitches for the outer 2. We're going to just gently tug it tight. We're then going to take the next gathering in order, flip it over on top of our book, so we make sure that top is correct. It doesn't matter as much for a blank book like the one we're making, but if the book already had writing on it, like it would have in the medieval time period, or if you were repairing a Coptic book, then you would want to make sure that your gatherings are in order and correctly oriented. So we're going to go through the corresponding hole from the outside to the inside. And now our cover is attached to our first gathering, and we're starting to sew our second gathering on. Because the gatherings are loose and have a tendency to flop around, it can be very helpful to line your gathering up along the edge, take a binder's clip, and clip it on the far side, just to keep your gathering in place while you're sewing it. So you're going to take your needle and you're going to go through the next hole in order. And we're going to do our first chain stitch. It's very simple. You're going to go underneath the stitch that we made connecting the first gathering to the cover. And then you're going to go back into the hole in your second gathering, the one you're currently working on. To form a chain stitch. Doesn't look like much now, but after you've done a few gatherings, it will start to look more like a chain stitch. And I'm going to tighten it down so that this long stitch lays flush in the fold of the gathering. I'm going to go to the next hole in order and do the same thing. I'm going to loop my needle under the stitch that connects the first gathering to the cover, and then I'm going to go back into the hole that I came out of. And then I'm going to go to the next hole. Since this is one of the end holes, the outside holes, we're going to do the twisted stitch. It starts out the same. You're going to go underneath the stitch you did connecting the first gathering to the cover, and you're going to form this loop, and you're going to go back through the loop, and then you're going to pull the whole thing tight. And then you're going to take your next gathering in order, flip it down, open it up, and go through the corresponding hole from the outside to the inside. And I'm going to line up my edges and shift my binder's clip. So that it is now holding on to my new gathering. And then I'm going to sew into the second hole. And I'm going to, since it's one of the inner two holes, I'm going to do my chain stitch. So I'm going to loop around the stitch that I did previously, connecting the second gathering to the first gathering. And then I'm going to go back into the hole that I came out of. It's starting to look a little bit like a chain stitch. And I'm going to go to the next hole. I'm going to do the same thing. And I always loop around the previous stitch in the direction that I am sewing. So if I'm going this direction, I will loop from that direction. If I'm working my way this direction across the gathering, then that's the direction that I will loop from. For a basic chain stitch like this, that's the way to do it. There are other variations where you loop in opposite the direction that you are stitching from, but I will cover those in another video. Then we go to the last stitch on this gathering. And we will once again do a twisted stitch. So we're going to loop around the previous stitch that we did to form a loop. And then we're going to go through the loop. We're going to pull it tight. And then we're going to add the next gathering. Open the gathering up. Go from the outside to the inside on the appropriate hole. Line the edges up and reposition your binder's clip. The binder's clip is optional, but I find it very helpful. And you're going to continue stitching in this way, doing chain stitch on the inner two holes and twisted stitch on the outer two holes, always looping your thread in the direction that you're going. And you're going to do this for every gathering that you have that you want to put in your book. As you can see, it's much more clearly starting to form a chain now. So I'm going to skip ahead to the end when it's time to attach the other cover. I have now sewed all of the gatherings on, and I'm ready to attach the back cover. So, similar to the front cover, I'm going to go into the corresponding hole and form a loop around the spine. And then I'm going to go back into the hole that I came out of in the last gathering. Going to adjust the cover so that it is in place and pull tight. And I'm going to go back along the stitches that I already did. I'm going to go back through the next hole, and then through the corresponding hole on the cover. Sometimes I'll go from the inside to the outside, sometimes I'll go from the outside to the inside. I haven't noticed that it really makes a difference, so do whatever works best for you. And then I'm going to go around the spine and back through the same hole. And then as you can see, the thread's a little loose, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to tighten it up a little. Pull gently to tighten the stitch, and then pull gently on my working thread to tighten it back up again. And I want to make sure that the cover is lined up the way it's supposed to be. And I'm going to go out the next hole. And you want to be careful when you're doing this, not to accidentally stab the cover itself. It's always a little tricky at this step. And then I'm going to go through the corresponding hole in the cover. Make sure everything's tight. And then go back through the hole in the last gathering. That one got a little loose again, so I'm going to go back and tighten it. Then the last hole. Corresponding hole in the spine, and then back into the hole you came out of. And then it's time to tie off your thread. So you're going to loop your needle under the long stitch here, form a loop. Put your needle through the loop, form a second loop, pull the first loop tight, and put your needle through the second loop and pull the whole thing tight. And I try to center mine as best I can over this hole here. And then you're going to trim up your thread, remove your binder clip if you used one. Go back to the first gathering, trim the excess thread as close to the knot as you can. You can finish the book here just like this, or you can add end bands, which I will demonstrate in a future video.